Respected faculty and students of Madurai Medical College, staff nurses, paramedical team and all. See, there is enough instructions from Government of India, Tamil Nadu government, DME regarding third wave expectations. Unfortunately, pediatrics age group expected to be affected around 10% of the total cases. We, Madurai Medical College, is fully prepared to face the consequences of third wave for pediatric age group also. In this aspect, we have created enough 30 ICU beds, 100 beds, enough ventilators, enough monitors, etc. Whatever consequences, we are fully prepared to face it. The Department of Pediatrics, headed by HOD and all other faculty, have done a very good work in preparing the entire paramedical team and others for the betterment of the children in this part of the Tamil Nadu. Hope for the best. All the best for all. Thank you.
Good morning, one and all. I am Dr. Balasankar, Professor Head of the Department of Pediatrics, Madurai Medical College and Government Rajaji Hospital. At the outset, I would like to thank our Dean for encouraging us to make this video on management of COVID in children. I also thank Professor Dr. Sendil, who is the coordinator of COVID management of our hospital, who has helped us in so many ways during this pandemic for the past 1.5 years. I thank you, sir. This video is made with the intention of imparting some basic knowledge to all the faculty and postgraduates of our institution, Madurai Medical College, apart from pediatrics, so that if at all a third wave comes and we get a lot of children affected with COVID, there will not be any difficulty for us in managing the COVID situation. That is the motive behind making this video. This video contains 3 parts. First is COVID in children, general part, its clinical features and management, that will be dealt by Professor Rajkumar. The second part is MIS-C, multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children, that will be dealt by me. And the third is COVID, neonatal aspects, that will be dealt by Professor Dr. Ashok Raja, Associate Professor of Neonatology. I hope this video will be very useful to all of you and it is worth watching. Thank you.
Good evening, one and all. First of all, I would like to thank our beloved Dean Ratnaveli sir and my HOD Balasankar sir for guiding us in preparing this COVID pediatrics at Madurai Medical College. And today I am going to talk about COVID-19 management. We all know that COVID-19 is a viral respiratory illness caused by SARS-CoV-2, a single-stranded RNA virus that most likely originated in bats in China. And children have been protected from developing severe COVID pneumonia so far. It's a silver lining in the dismal landscape of the current pandemic. In a study from China, the illness severity was lower in children with 80% having asymptomatic infection and 15% having mild disease and 5% having a moderate to severe disease and less than 1% having critical disease requiring admission in ICU or ventilator care. And many of the children with COVID-19 who did require this, who become very critical and they were admitted in ICU, required ventilator care, actually they had pre-existing medical problems such as obesity, morbid obesity, to be frank, actually the immune suppression, CKD, CSD and cancer. So COVID-19, how does it spread? Direct person-to-person transmission occurs through close contact, mainly through respiratory droplets that are released when the infected person coughs, sneezes or talks. The median incubation period is 5.1 days. The range is about 2 to 14 days. The period of infectivity starts 2 days prior to the onset of symptoms and may last up to 8 days. This is the clinical presentation in pediatric age group. Fever is the most common presentation. Cough, nasal congestion or rhinorrhea, sore throat, shortness of breath, diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, fatigue, headache, myalgia, poor feeding or poor appetite, and of course rashes also sometimes. This is a clinical classification of pediatric COVID-19 infection because the management depends on the clinical classification. So we come across a lot of children who are asymptomatic, but incidentally they are found to be RAT, that is rapid antigen positive or RT-PCR positive, or sometimes they are suspected. The family members are actually positive, and the children they live along with them, but rapid antigen test or RT-PCR test may be negative or sometimes not available. So we actually take them as asymptomatic group. The next one is those children who are having mild symptoms such as sore throat or rhinorrhea, and there might be cough, but there won't be any breathing difficulty, and respiratory rate would be normal, and SpO2 would be more than 94% on room air. And they may have other common symptoms and put in the slide. Moderate COVID-19, in addition to symptoms in mild cases, there might be symptoms, signs and symptoms of pneumonia which may not be apparent actually. So how to look for pneumonia in children? We have to count the respiratory rate. The respiratory rate, there is a cutoff for each age group. Less than 2 months, the respiratory rate, if it goes more than 60, we call it as tachypnea. And between 2 to 12 months, the respiratory rate, if it goes more than 50 per minute. And between 1 to 5 years, if it goes more than 40. And more than 5 years, if it goes more than 30. And the saturation remains 90 to 93% in room air. So if these tachypnea and this saturation, there is a mild drop in saturation in room air, we have to suspect COVID pneumonia. And there might be other symptoms also there. So when we classify as severe pneumonia, when a child comes with a saturation of less than 90% on room air, I am showing the following, any of the following. And signs of severe pneumonia are acute respiratory distress syndrome, or signs and symptoms of septic shock, or multi-organ dysfunction syndrome, or child is having pneumonia with cyanosis, or grunting, severe retraction of chest, lethargy, somnolence, and sometimes throwing convulsions. So what are the investigations we do for pediatric COVID? Viral testing, that is the RT-PCR is the gold standard. We test for the presence of virus. And X-ray chest may show patchy infiltrates consistent with the viral pneumonia, and CT scan, like in adults, might show sometimes nodular ground glass opacities. And CBC, of course, lymphopenia and leukopenia is the most common presentation. And CRP might be elevated in the 50s or 100s. And elevated inflammatory biomarkers, actually, the baseline value, if it goes very high, we know that corresponds to the onset of cytokine release syndrome. So coming on to the management of pediatric COVID-19. So what is the management for asymptomatic and mild cases? So whenever we say asymptomatic or mild symptomatic cases, first of all, we have to look for the risk factors or comorbidities. So what are those risk factors or comorbidities? If the child has obesity, by looking at the child or by calculating the BMI. So if the child is having any immunosuppressed conditions like primary immunodeficiency, or child is taking some drugs which is causing immunosuppression, or child is having CKD, chronic kidney disease, or child is having congenital or acquired heart disease, or any respiratory illness or cancer. If these respective comorbidities are there, we are going to admit this child for a hospital-based care. And in the hospital, what we are going to do bed rest, adequate nutrition and hydration, and symptomatic treatment only for these patients, and management of comorbidities. That also needs management now. And monitoring for worsening, we will be monitoring. But if these are absent, we are going to send the patient to the home. The parents and our caregivers, they have to take care. And we have to advise them that child should be given strict bed rest and adequate nutrition and hydration and symptomatic management, fever with the paracetamol, something like that. And they have to monitor for worsening. This is the most important one, because almost 85 to, I told already, 75 to 85% of pediatric COVID-19 will be asymptomatic. And we have to tell the parents how to monitor. So how to train the parents? It hardly takes 5 to 10 minutes. We have to tell each parent how to look for it. So we tell the parents they have to daily 3 times per day they have to monitor the child for the following. What are the things? First, they have to look at the respiratory rate, the fast breathing. If there is a fast breathing, they have to immediately take the child to the nearest hospital or come to the COVID center. So the age appropriate respiratory rate should be explained. Already I told this, less than 2 months, if it is more than 60, we have to call it as abnormal. 2 to 12 is more than 50, and 1 to 5 years more than 40, and more than 5 years more than 30. If possible, if they are having pulse oximeter, okay, or they can go to the nearest any PHC or any hospital and they can check SpO2, and it should, if it goes 94% or for any time, they have to check for actually 1 full minute, then immediately they have to come to the COVID hospital. Or if the child develops any general red flag signs. So what are those red flag signs? These are the danger signs, and if any child develops, the parent should immediately bring to the attention of the pediatrician in the COVID ward, COVID hospital. So, excessive irritability or excessive sleepiness, cold hands or feet, a prolonged CRT, fast breathing, of course they know that, and bluish discoloration of fingers and breathing difficulty. Or if the child develops persistent abdominal pain and persistent vomiting, there are a lot of loose stools, the child is passing loose stools, and refusal of feces. If they are there, the parent should immediately bring and reduce to urination. So what is the management for moderate? A child with moderate COVID must be admitted in pediatric COVID care center. And the following investigations: CBC, CRP, ESR, random blood sugar, RFT, and X-ray chest must be done. And treatment, if it is more than 94%, the child maintains a saturation of more than 94%. Simple hydration, to ensure hydration, and paracetamol is more than enough. But if the child is showing a saturation of less than 94% or rapidly worsening respiratory distress, we have to start the child on oxygen plus steroids. So what steroid is indicated? Dexamethasone. The dose is 0.15 milligram per kg per day IV, maximum 6 milligram. It has to be given once daily for 5 to 10 days. We have to stop at discharge. Is there any role for antimicrobials? Antimicrobials are to be administered only if there is evidence or a strong suspicion of superadded bacterial infection. And what antimicrobial is needed for a moderate COVID pneumonia? We can start ceftriaxone or coamoxicillin. And we have to, of course, give supportive care for comorbid conditions. So what is the management for severe COVID pneumonia? This child with severe COVID pneumonia must be admitted in designated COVID hospital, preferably in ICU. We have to do this following investigations: CBC, CRP, LFT, RFT, blood sugar, ABG, D-dimer, ferritin, and X-ray chest. What is the role of CT chest here? CT chest is not routinely indicated in diagnosis or management of COVID-19 infection in children. CT chest should be considered only if there is no improvement in respiratory status after 1 or 2 days of management. So what is the management for a severe COVID pneumonia? We have to initiate immediate oxygen therapy, and we have to maintain a target SpO2 of 94 to 96%, and we have to maintain fluid and electrolyte balance, and corticosteroid therapy, that is the mainstay, to be initiated. Anticoagulants may be indicated. I'll tell the indications where we have to start anticoagulants. In case of ARDS, a shock, initiate necessary management. And antimicrobials, already I told, even here, if there is evidence or strong suspicion of superadded bacterial infection only, we have to start antibiotics. So what is the respiratory support we have to give? So oxygen therapy, that is the mainstay of therapy. Low flow oxygen devices are recommended. Oxygen prongs or simple mask is more than enough. Nasal cannula at flows of 2 to 4 liters per minute is a very good choice. But please remember, a triple layer mask should be used to cover the mouth and nose to reduce the exposure, actually, for the caregivers, because aerosol might come out. And NRM, that's a non-rebreather mask. We know that simple mask or a nasal cannula gives an FiO2 of about 40% only. So if the child is not improving or saturation is slowly falling down, we can try NRM, non-rebreather mask, because it can give an FiO2 of 60 to 80% at a flow rate of 10 to 15 liters per minute. But if they are failing, we have to go for other measures like HFNC. But remember, this HFNC is found to be associated with a lot of aerosol generation due to use of higher flows and leaks. So there is a risk for cross-infection for other children as well as other caregivers. So it will be very, very careful with HFNC. The dose, how much the calculation for oxygen flow is about 10 up to 10 kilo. We have to give 2 ml per kg. After 10 kilo, it is 20 ml plus 0.5 ml per kg. So when will you go for mechanical ventilation? When there is in case of non-improvement or worsening of respiratory failure or nasal prongs, and if trial HFNC fails, we have to go for early elective intubation. And this procedure of intubation is a very high risk, in view of aerosol generation, and it has to be performed by the most experienced team member by using the technique of RSI. And if available and trained, video laryngoscopic guided intubation is preferred. And of course, we have to use a transparent plastic cooled enclosure. So these are the PARDS, pediatric ARDS strategies followed in COVID-19 management. We have to give a low tidal volume ventilation. That is the most important one. If the lungs are good compliance is there, we have to use a tidal volume of 6 to 8 ml per kg with a PEEP of 7 to 10 centimeter water. If compliance is poor, we have to go still further with a tidal volume of 4 to 6 ml per kg with a PEEP of 10 to 15. But please limit the peak level to at 28 centimeter of water. And we have to give less fluid for the child with COVID pneumonia, severe COVID pneumonia, restrict the maintenance fluid to 60 to 70% because of the association of SIADH. And liberal pseudoanalgesia to be given, and the neuromuscular blockade has to be given, and the steroids, of course, we already started. And prone ventilation, like in adults, it also helps here. But only thing you have to remember that it's a high risk procedure due to requirement of more staff and ventilator disconnection in pediatric age group. So what are the drugs which can be given in severe COVID pneumonia? Antibiotics, already we told. There is, again I want to mention, again, no routine prophylactic antibiotics in all cases or OP cases. And asymptomatic mild cases, antibiotic, there is no role of antibiotics. And moderate to severe also, they should be given only if there is a clinical suspicion of superadded infection. Only in child comes with septic shock, empirical antimicrobials according to body weight are frequently ordered to cover all likely pathogens based on clinical judgment, patient host factors, and local epidemiology and antimicrobial policy of the hospital. And of course, these are the indications for starting antibiotics in COVID-19. When severe COVID-19 cases, severe or critical, and any child with severe acute malnutrition and immunocompromised, either primary or secondary, nephrotic syndrome on steroids, malignancy, and any sick child less than 5 years, better to start antibiotics with severe COVID pneumonia. So what is the role of remdesivir? A solidarity trial involving 12,000 patients and 500 hospitals in 30 countries by WHO. Actually, it showed no survival benefit even in adults, no reduction in ventilation, and there is a slight reduction in length of hospital stay. And remdesivir, an emergency use authorization like in adults, is not recommended in children. There is lack of sufficient evidence on safety and efficacy with respect to remdesivir in pediatric age group. But case by case basis, remdesivir can be used, especially those children like immunocompromised and malignant child with malignancy. There we can try if the child is very sick and critical. Case by case basis, in our COVID hospital, we tried remdesivir. And we got almost 50% of patients where we tried remdesivir, the patient came good. And the dose is more than 3.5 to 40 kilo. It's 5 milligram per kg IV loading dose on day 1, followed by 2.5 milligram per kg every 24 hours. More than 40 kilo, there is a 200 milligram IV loading dose on day 1, followed by 100 milligram per IV every 24 hours. The usual duration of therapy is up to 4 days. Coming up to the cytokine release syndrome, it's characterized by severe inflammation with hyperferritinemia, high CRP in hundreds, and high interleukin levels. So, how to monitor for cytokine release syndrome in pediatric age group? It's us like in adults. Obtain baseline CRP, D-dimer, ferritin, LDH, interleukin 6 levels. Then we have to monitor them 2 to 3 times per week at an interval of 2 to 3 days. But we have to look for falling BP or worsening hypoxemia and increasing levels of biomarkers. Then we know that the child has entered cytokine release syndrome. And the therapy for cytokine release syndrome, we all know already we started the therapy, immunomodulatory therapy, steroids, to be used in rapidly progressive, moderate, and all severe and critically ill COVID-19 cases. The doses, the drugs which are steroids, or the drugs which are steroids indicated are dexamethasone and methylprednisolone. Dexamethasone, the dose is 0.15 milligram per kg, maximum dose is 6 milligram once a day, and methylprednisolone 0.75 milligram per kg, maximum dose is 30 milligram once a day. We have to continue for 5 to 7 days, then taper slowly over a period of another 7 days till a period of 14 days. And steroids should be used at the right time, in right dose, and for the right duration. We have to avoid steroids in first 3 to 5 days since onset of symptoms as it prolongs viral shedding. And steroids are not at all indicated and harmful in asymptomatic and mild cases of COVID-19. What are the experimental therapy which can be given as immunomodulatory therapy? They are not to be routinely used. They also should be considered on a case-by-case basis in cytokine release syndrome. The first one is tocilizumab, which is interleukin 6 inhibitor. The pediatric dose is less than 30 kilo, 12 milligram per kg, one dose. And more than 30, we have to give a dose of 8 milligram per kg, one dose. The maximum amount is 800 milligram. But please be aware that this tocilizumab can cause gastrointestinal perforation or hepatitis or infusion reaction. And IVIG, the dose is 2 gram per kg, slow IV infusion over 2 to 3 hours. So what is the role of anticoagulation? Like in adults, we are not using anticoagulation routinely in pediatrics. The prophylactic anticoagulant is indicated only if there is a strong personal or family history of VTE, venous thromboembolism history, or an indwelling central venous line, and two additional risk factors, or a 4 or more risk factors. What are those risk factors? Decreased mobility from baseline, burns, active malignancy, estrogen therapy, flare of inflammatory disease, morbid obesity, severe dehydration, recent surgery or trauma. If 4 are there, or 2 plus indwelling line or a strong family history, we start anticoagulant. So what is the drug used? Low molecular weight heparin, enoxaparin is used. The dose is 0.5 milligram per kg twice daily till child is discharged from hospital. So management of shock, it's like in our other pediatric shock, we use steroids like Ringer-Loctate or normal saline, bolus 10 to 20 ml per kg, usually over 30 minutes or 60 minutes with yearly vasoactive support like epinephrine. And we have to start any child with septic shock, start antimicrobials within the first hour after taking blood cultures according to hospital antibiogram or treatment guidelines. And we have to consider inotrops like Milinor or dobutamine if poor perfusion or myocardial dysfunction persists despite fluid boluses. And vasoactive drugs, despite fluid boluses, vasoactive drugs and achievement of target mean arterial pressure. And steroids to be maybe added if there is fluid refractory catecholamic decision shock. If already child is on dexamethasone, just to ignore it. So these are the supportive management. They also play a very important role. We have to start early enteral nutrition. A child on ventilator or child is very sick, we should not leave the child as such. We have to start early enteral nutrition and initiate within 24 hours, and we have to achieve full feeds by 48 hours. And if the hemoglobin level is low, go for transfusion. If the hemoglobin is less than 7, even if a patient is stable, we have to give. Our patient is sick with refractory hypoxemia and unstable shock, even if the hemoglobin level is less than 10, 9 or 10, we have to give transfusion. So what is the course and prognosis of pediatric COVID-19 severe pneumonia? The respiratory failure or cytokine symptom, usually they occur around the day of 7 of onset of symptoms with a peak severity at day 10. And most of the children, usually they recover by about day 14. And usually these children with no reported underlying medical conditions, they have a very low case fatality rate. The recovery is the rule. Only problem is children who are having comorbidities like cardiovascular disease, chronic respiratory disease, chronic kidney disease, and immunocompromised conditions. These are the children who have a very high case fatality rate. This is the revised discharge policy for pediatric COVID-19. This one, any very mild. Usually we do not admit asymptomatic. We do not admit. We will be advising them home-based care. No RT-PCR test required after after 5 or 10 days. For moderate COVID-19 pneumonia, we admit, and if a fever is observed within 3 days and saturation is maintained without support, we discharge after 10 days of symptom onset, and no RT-PCR test is required. Symptoms not resolved and demand of oxygen therapy continues. We discharge only after resolution of clinical symptoms, and here also no RT-PCR test is required. Only in severe COVID-19 pneumonia with critical illness, we will discharge only after clinical recovery, and we will do a RT-PCR test, and when it becomes negative only, we will discharge. So these are the take-home points for today. Due to some age-specific peculiar factors, most children escape unscathed from COVID-19, except those with comorbidities. Asymptomatic and mild pediatric COVID-19 illness don't require any specific treatment. We have to just train the parents about home monitoring and explain to them about the danger signs. And CT chest is not routinely indicated in diagnosis or management of COVID-19 infection in children. Antimicrobials are to be administered if there is evidence or a strong suspicion of superadded bacterial infection. And severe COVID management, just oxygen, fluid therapy, and steroids. HFNC or non-invasive ventilation are better to be avoided. Go for intubation if child worsens on oxygen plants. And steroids are not indicated or harmful in asymptomatic and mild case of COVID-19. They are to be used only in rapidly progressive, moderate, and severe COVID-19 cases. And finally, children with no reported underlying medical conditions, of course 99.9% are like this. They have a very low case fatality rate. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Then coming 10 to 15 minutes, I'll be talking to you on MIS-C, one of the important complications of COVID infection in children. Though COVID virus is not a good virus, one important good quality it has, that is, it has been soft on children always. It has been soft. What I mean is, you have also learned that the COVID infection in children has caused only mild symptoms or majority of the times asymptomatic, and the morbidity is negligible and mortality is very, very low as far as COVID infection in children is concerned. So, what I can say in Tamil is COVID வந்து ஒரு தாயுள்ளத்தோட தான் குழந்தைகளை அணுகிருக்குன்னு தான் சொல்லணும். But under this, that's why we pediatricians did not have much of a caseload during COVID, like the case of internal medicine people, pulmonologist and anesthetist and all. But in US and UK, the pediatricians started getting children with various group of manifestations which resembled Kawasaki disease, atypical Kawasaki disease, and somebody presented like serum sickness, somebody presented like toxic shock syndrome, and they all found that the antibody levels in these children for COVID was very high. So they found that this is a complication of a COVID infection in children, and they have started naming it on their own. And so many names this complication had. For example, it had names like PMIS, PIMS, PIMS with /TS. All these names were given for this constellation of symptoms that occurred after COVID infection in children. And they started treating it individually according to their wish. Then WHO stepped in and they compiled all the clinical features and investigations that prove that will give a definite guideline for the diagnosis of MIS-C in children. So the recent guideline for diagnosis of this MIS-C, that is multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, is coined by WHO. And the management guidelines have also been clearly defined today. So the word MIS-C is coined by WHO only. Now what is MIS-C? MIS-C is a multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children. It is characterized by, it's a hyperinflammatory syndrome with dermatologic, mucocutaneous GI manifestations and cardiac dysfunction in children and adolescents. And it follows COVID infection. Either it may be asymptomatic or asymptomatic. And usually the cases come after 4 weeks of a peak COVID season in adults. What I mean is after getting an infection, somewhere between 2 to 6 weeks of time, the children come with this complication. Okay, right. So it is a post-COVID complication in children. But please remember that some of the children who come with this classical manifestation of MIS-C may be positive for throat swab also. So it is not only a post-COVID complication, it may be there along with COVID infection also very rarely. So what are the clinical features of MIS-C? Fever. Fever is a constant feature in case of COVID, this MIS-C in children. Fever should be there for minimum of 3 days or more than that. And without fever, we do not make a diagnosis of MIS-C. So fever should be there to make a diagnosis of MIS-C in a child. And next important thing is a cervical lymphadenopathy, other clinical feature, where you can get unilateral cervical lymphadenopathy. 1 or 2 nodes may be there, more than 1.5 centimeter size. Sometimes there may be bilateral cervical lymphadenopathy, and very rarely it may be generalized lymphadenopathy. And child will have another classical feature is conjunctivitis. Conjunctivitis, it involves characteristically the bulbar conjunctiva, and it is not purulent conjunctivitis. That is, what I mean is there will not be any conjunctival secretion as in case of any of this bacterial or viral infection, right? And there will be red cracked lips and strawberry color tongue. So another important feature is that. And there will be edema of hands and feet, and erythema of the palms and soles is another feature, important feature. And there is a diffuse skin rash. Skin rash is a erythematous maculopapular rash, red in color, more over the trunk and the extremities. And please remember that this conjunctivitis may be very transient and it may be lasting for a day or two. So you may have to ask the history in the parents that whether the eyes was red 2 days or 3 days earlier, and they may say that yes, it was earlier red, now it is cleared. Okay, then it can also cause symptoms related to other systems. For example, gastrointestinal system, typically it causes diarrhea, vomiting, pain abdomen, and it can involve the respiratory system also in the form of ARDS and respiratory distress. And the important complication which is deadly and responsible for majority of the death in MIS-C is due to this cardiac complications, where it can cause myocarditis, pericarditis, endocarditis, valvulitis, and coronary artery dilatation, aneurysm of coronary arteries, which may predispose them to future thrombosis and ischemic heart disease at an earlier age. It can also involve the central nervous system. Central nervous system features can also occur in the form of either irritability or drowsiness. Child may have meningeal signs of meningeal irritation, altered sensorium, sometimes convulsion and encephalopathy-like features. So, the manifestations are can involve many systems. It may confuse with many other diagnoses like your tropical infections or serum sickness and all those things. But you have to have an open mind to see and make a diagnosis of MIS-C, as the clinical manifestations vary widely. These are some of the classical pictures of children of MIS-C, which we had here. See this child, beautiful, that has got a bulbar conjunctival congestion. See the tongue, it is red and inflamed. See the edema of the dorsum of the foot, red and cracked lips in this child. See this child has got once again conjunctival suffusion, red cracked lips, and you can see the rash over the trunk in this child. So these are the classical features of MIS-C. What is the diagnostic criteria coined by WHO? See, it involves children anywhere between 0 to 19 years, that is adolescents also. And fever, as I already told, should be there for 3 days or more than 3 days. And any of these two features should be there to coin that it is MIS-C. A rash or bilateral non-purulent conjunctivitis or mucocutaneous inflammatory signs. Okay. Then hypotension or shock. Features of myocardial dysfunction in the form of myocarditis, pericarditis. It may be clinically manifest or echo findings may be there, or in the form of elevated markers like troponin and NT-proBNP. The next important finding is the evidence of coagulopathy in the form of prolonged PT, APTT and elevated D-dimers, or acute gastrointestinal symptoms, as I told, vomiting, diarrhea or pain abdomen. Among these 5, 2 should be there compulsorily. And plus all these things, elevated markers of inflammation should be there in the form of either ESR or CRP. And along with that, no other evidence of other bacterial infection should be there. We should be able to rule out the possibility of other bacterial infections, especially the tropical infections and streptococcal and staphylococcal infection, which are known to cause what is called toxic shock syndrome, which will clinically resemble this MIS-C, as it also causes congenital suffusion, multi-organ dysfunction, rash, and all those things. So that has to be ruled out before making a diagnosis of MIS-C. And along with that, we should have evidence for COVID-19 infection in the child, either in the form of positive RT-PCR or rapid antigen test or positive serology. Please remember, almost all the children we have seen here was antibody positive and very rarely RT-PCR positive. And if these things are not there, at least there should be a history of contact with a definite COVID-19 positive patient. So all these 4 categories should be there to make a diagnosis of MIS-C. Okay, then we will move on to the investigation. Government of India guidelines gives it in 2 tiers, tier 1 and tier 2. We can just remember that tier 1 investigation is basic investigations to confirm that it is a missing. And tier 2 investigations are higher end investigations which are essential to confirm higher end investigations which are essential in case of a severely affected disease, severely affected child, or in a child who has got a myocardial dysfunction and all. That is mainly of this cardiac evaluation. What are the tier 1 investigations? First is CRP more than 5 milligram per deciliter, ESR more than 40, and all these 5 things, any one of it is there. If it is there, then it is taken as significant. What are they? Absolute leukocyte count of less than 1000, platelet count less than 1.5 lakhs per microliter, neutrophilia in the form of more than 7,700 absolute neutrophils in the blood, and serum sodium less than 135 hyponatremia, or serum albumin less than 3 hypoalbuminemia. So among these 5, if one is positive, then it is taken as a significant and can make a diagnosis of a MIS-C. Along with this, we have to do SARS-CoV RT-PCR under serology. Once again, I tell you, the serology is almost always positive in this case of a MIS-C. And we have we have to do also the investigations to rule out the common tropical infections like dengue, typhoid, malaria, and scrub typhus. Okay, so these things also should be negative. The evidence for these infections should also be negative to make a diagnosis of MIS-C. So that is also coming under tier 1. And tier 2 investigations is mainly cardiac, ECG, echo, and troponin T and proBNP. Then procalcitonin, ferritin, D-dimer, TGL, LDH, and the cytokine panel. So these are all the higher end investigations which are done in teaching hospitals. These are done if the child is sick or is having cardiac manifestation. So how do we manage MIS-C? So depending on the clinical symptoms, we can divide them into 3 categories of people. And the management is going to differ a little among these group of symptom constellations. One first category is MIS-C with shock or multi-organ dysfunction syndrome, where the child comes with failure, shock, and liver failure, respiratory failure, and all those things, coagulation failure, all those things. That comes, there are very sick children, first group. Second group is typical Kawasaki-like presentation, where you get all the features of Kawasaki, like conjunctive suffusion, lymph nodes, rash, cracked lips, edema legs, and all those things. That is Kawasaki type. And the third one is the MIS-C without shock, where you get fever of 4 or 5 days duration, elevated inflammatory markers. 1 or 2 features of MIS-C I have already suggested. This is another group which is very stable. The third group is so stable group. So the management for the children with the shock or multi-organ dysfunction. The drug of choice is IVIG. The dose is 2 grams per kilogram body weight, and it's a very costly drug. And remember, we are giving it free of cost for all the children who have been admitted and who deserve IVIG in our government Rajaji Hospital. And there is no deficit of getting this IVIG supply from the government side. And 2 grams per kilogram body weight over 12 to 16 hours. That has to be infused. Along with that, we have to give IV methylprednisolone, the dose of 2 milligram per kg per day, plus empirical antimicrobials, because here the child is very sick and we cannot wait till the results for other systemic infections come, as I already mentioned. So we have to add empirical antibiotics to this children. Plus that supportive measures. What supportive measures? If the child is coming with shock, we can give a fluid challenge of saline 10 to 20 ml per kg over 30 minutes to 1 hour and all. If the child comes in refractory shock, we may have to go for drugs like dopamine, dobutamine, and adrenaline infusion and all those things. So these are all supportive measures. If necessary, ventilator care and all those things, oxygen ventilator care, everything comes under supportive measures. Okay. If with these measures, IV agent, with methylprednisolone, the symptoms are not improving after 48 to 72 hours of treatment, or if there is early worsening of the symptoms, then we may have to increase the dose of IV methylprednisolone to 10 milligram per kg per day. Some others say 10 to 30 milligram per kg per day may be given. And we may have to, if there is no response even with that IV methylprednisolone of higher dose, then we may have to consult some other specialists and experts in biologicals, and you may have to go in for tocilizumab or anakinra and all those things. Okay, right. Next phenotype is Kawasaki phenotype. Once again, IVIG is the drug of choice. The same dose, 2 gram per kilogram body weight, plus IV methylprednisolone, 1 to 2 milligram per kg per day. Here, they usually will not need antibiotics or any supportive measures. And if the symptoms do not improve within 48 to 72 hours of treatment, or it is worsening, we may have to think of repeating IVIG once again, or increasing IV methylprednisolone dose, or we may have to consult a specialist or experts in biologicals. Once again, the tocilizumab or anakinra may have to be given for these children if they are refractory to this line of management. Okay, right. Next is MIS-C without shock. These children are very stable otherwise, but for fever and elevated inflammatory markers, they are stable. So here we give only methylprednisolone, but IV should be given 1 to 2 milligram per kg per day. And if the symptoms do not subside by 48 to 72 hours of treatment, or if it is worsening, it will usually follow into one of these groups of Kawasaki, like, or going for shock and all those things. Okay, so next line of management, you all know that we may have to go in for IVIG. So in some cases of MIS-C, we have encountered that they are not improving with only IV methylprednisolone, and after 4 or 5 days, we have given IV IG, and they have responded to that and they have improved. Okay, right. So this is about the management. And how long we should continue steroids? IV methylprednisolone should be given for 3 to 5 days, and we have to monitor the inflammatory markers also. That is very, very important. And once the symptoms improve, subside, then we can make it as a oral prednisolone in the dose of 1 to 2 milligram per kg per day, and we give it for about 1 to 2 weeks and slowly taper over 2 to 3 weeks. So total duration of steroid treatment will be for 2 to 3 weeks, and we have to monitor the inflammatory markers while we are giving the steroids and see whether they are coming down. Okay. Is there any role for antiplatelet agents or anticoagulants? Yes. Aspirin has got a definite role, and it has to be given for all the cases of MIS-C, and the dose is 3 to 5 milligram per kg per day. And we have to be careful when we are using aspirin, because these children can have, along with that, bleeding manifestation and platelet count, very low platelet count. If it is there, then we have to withhold aspirin, and we may not be able to use aspirin. And aspirin should be continued for 4 to 6 weeks. So when we discharge that child, we give clear instruction that steroid has to be given for this long, and aspirin has to be given for this long. And with that advice, they go home. Then what is the role of low molecular weight heparin? Yes, it is indicated if there is severe coronary artery involvement. They have got one score called Z score to find out the degree of coronary dilatation. And if the Z score is more than 10, then it is an indication for low molecular weight heparin. Otherwise, also, if the left ventricular function is very low, the ejection fraction is less than 35%, or if there is a complex or multiple aneurysms in the coronaries, or if there is any presence of thrombus anywhere, either in the coronary or anywhere in the body, then we can give enoxaparin in the dose of 1 milligram per kg twice a day. Okay, right. And how do we follow? We have to monitor the child carefully, especially if there is cardiac problem, cardiac involvement, or there is shock or other serious system dysfunctions. Okay, and we have to repeat the ECG every 48 hours to look for any presence of arrhythmia or these things which can occur in these children. And the echo has to be done if the child is very sick, and we may have to repeat it as and when needed till the child gets discharged, okay, or stabilizes. So what's the discharge criteria? A child should be stable for 48 hours. What I mean by stable? No fever for 48 hours, stable clinical status. CCF may be there, but should be under control with drugs, and cardiac function without vasoactive drugs or inotropes. So child should be able to support its cardiac function without inotropes, and a decreasing level of inflammatory markers. How do we follow up these children? We send them with clear instruction to continue aspirin, steroids, and duration of these drugs to be taken, and if necessary, anti-failure drugs. We send them with these drugs, and we ask them to come after 1 to 2 weeks, and once again at 4 to 6 weeks. And each time we have to clinically evaluate them for features of failure or ischemic heart disease, and we also have to do echo and look for ejection fraction and coronary artery size. This is a must in all the cases of a MIS-C. Okay, right. If the child already had cardiac problem in the form of valvulitis, myocarditis, CCF, or had shown coronary dilatation, then once again we have to call them back by 1 year of age and see whether the cardiac status is normal and the coronaries have come back to normal. This is how we have to follow the child. Okay, right. Thank you very much for your patient hearing. Thank you.
So today we are going to see an update regarding the neonatal COVID management. A lot of experience gained from the previous two waves has enabled us a better understanding about how to manage a neonate, particularly the perinatal management of COVID. And recently, NNF National Neonatology Forum has also published an update on the neonatal COVID management. So we'll start by the management of neonate. So immediately after birth, the newborn has to be resuscitated. Is there anything different for a COVID-born neonate? The thing is, we need to wear a full PPE. There is no compromise on it to avoid infection of the caregiver and spread infection to other neonates as well. And the other things are routine self-inflating bag and mask, or a TP resuscitator is used. A disposable circuit may be used. And a suction has to be done only if there is any strong indication. Routine suction is not advised even for a normal neonate. And here there is a chance that the virus may spread. So suction only if indicated. The other newer things like delayed cord clamping done for more than 34 weeks of age can be followed in this neonatal COVID also. So there is no contraindication for delayed cord clamping. And even yearly skin to skin care or KMC care can also be recommended. The only thing is endotracheal administration of medication should be avoided, because if we give endotracheal administration of medications and bagging, all these things is usually not recommended for because it is not that much effective compared to IV administration of your adrenaline. Also, it may enhance the secretions and spreading of COVID-19. So avoid endotracheal administration of medication, and routine bathing is not recommended. Also, initially in the COVID wave, some wiping the neonate to wipe out the secretions, which may be contaminated with the virus, was practiced. Nowadays, it has been known that hypothermia is more dangerous, so bathing is not recommended. So in the neonatal resuscitation, your PPE is a must. The other things have not much changed for a COVID positive or a perinatal mother positive, positive mother who is going to deliver a baby. So next is after resuscitation, we have to ship the baby to some care area. So at least 3 care areas should be there. One is the mother ward or the postnatal COVID ward, where well babies are shifted. The baby after resuscitation is well and more than 34 weeks and is able to take breastfeeds, then it can be kept with the mother in the postnatal COVID ward. Suppose the baby is sick, having some respiratory disease or for any other illness, and it is a preterm less than 34 weeks, then it can be kept initially in the COVID suspect ward. After evaluation, if the baby become positive, it has to be transported to a COVID confirmed ward. So at least 3 areas are recommended. One is routine postnatal ward for the COVID positive mothers, where well babies are kept. A COVID suspect ward and a COVID confirmed ward has to be separated. The NICU has to be split into a COVID suspect ward or a COVID confirmed ward. Okay. So now the baby is received in a particular ward. So if the baby is a well baby and kept with the mother, what are all the things that are recommended? The routine rooming in as for other neonates is recommended in COVID positive neonates also. So baby can be kept along with the mother's room, Only thing, during non-feeding times, it can be kept a little away 6 feet from the bed to avoid any coughing or secretions to fall on the mother. The exclusive breastfeeding must be promoted, and formula feeding or mixed feeding must be avoided. So this is like a normal unit. You have to room in, give direct breastfeeds. If not able to give direct breastfeeds, give expressed breast milk. And KMC care can be done. As for any neonate, it can be done by the mother. The mother is sick, father can do, or any healthy attender who is able to understand the respiratory hygiene and hygiene, and she can also give. So can be given by the mother, father, or any healthy attender. So just like a normal unit, if the well baby is there, it can be given the routine care. Provided 3 things: hand hygiene, respiratory hygiene, and frequent cleaning of the surfaces to be done by the parents or the attender. Even a healthy attender can be allowed to reside with the mother to help the mother during the initial time of feeding and the initial postnatal days. So hand hygiene is a must. Frequent hand washing or hand hygiene with alcohol rub should be done. Mother should always wear at least a 3-layer mask during the time of feeding. She should avoid coughing or sneezing directly over the baby. And if at all she has to cough, she has to use a tissue paper and it has to be disposed, and she should take hand hygiene. And frequent cleaning of surfaces touched by hair can be done with the alcohol or even your hand rub that can be used for cleaning the surfaces. So hand hygiene, respiratory hygiene, and frequent cleaning of the surfaces is recommended. Previously, chest hygiene was also insisted. Nowadays, if you have a proper respiratory hygiene, that itself is enough. No need to clean the chest with alcohol or other solutions. Okay. So that is for a well baby. The baby is having some respiratory distress, or the baby is sick, it needs to be cared initially in a COVID suspect ward. And the mode of respiratory support is decided by the severity of the respiratory distress and the underlying lung condition. It is not decided by whether the baby is COVID positive or negative. So like the respiratory disease is minimal, a low flow O2 cannula can be used. The respiratory disease is moderate or severe, initially you can go with high flow cannula or CPAP. And in case of severe respiratory disease or a CPAP failure, the baby can be intubated and can be given invasive ventilation. So comparing high flow nasal cannula, CPAP, and non-invasive ventilation. Non-invasive ventilation can generate, because the pressures are more, can generate more aerosols. So better initial management can be with CPAP or high flow nasal cannula. So in adults and children, usually high flow nasal cannula, there is a little concern that it can generate aerosols, but in neonates, the flow used is very less. The maximum flow recommended in studies is only 8 liters. So high flow nasal cannula means, unlike the pediatric patient where 10 to 15 liters are used, it should not be used in neonates. So the maximum flow is very less only. So use lowest pressure and the lowest flow possible to alleviate the respiratory distress. Okay. Otherwise, baby can be intubated and ventilated. So that is for a sick neonate. So the modality of management, there is no much change. Only thing is use a low flow as possible. During the respiratory hygiene, what other precautions should be taken? This is called aerosol generating medical safety precautions for AGMPS. Aerosol generating medical procedures needs to be followed. So always wear a PPE, a full PPE, including covering your face, eyes, and N95 mask. The caregiver during intubation and other respiratory care, she should be in a full suit. A negative pressure area is recommended to avoid aerosol or respiratory droplet transmission. And electively pre-medicate for elective intubation. So if the baby struggles, it can generate aerosol, and so better to go for pre-medication for elective intubation. A cuffed endotracheal tube, if available, is preferred, because that also avoids when aerosol generation coming out from the trachea. Important thing is inline suction, if available, is to be used. So inline suction is recommended. Instead of disconnecting the ET tube and putting a suction, the inline suction helps in providing suction, as well as because it is a closed suction, it avoids aerosol generation and the contamination of the external surfaces and the caregiver. Minimize endotracheal tube disconnections as far as possible. So these are all the precautions that are recommended while ventilating, giving a CPAP or other respiratory care for a COVID suspect or positive neonate. And the other things which are tried in children and adults, initially if attaching a filter to your TPs and bag and mask is not recommended in neonates because of the high resistance that will impede your pressures. Second, the aerosol box, which was initially devised for adults, is also not recommended because the chance of aerosol generation is very less in neonates. Also, the aerosol a little cumbersome during endotracheal tube intubation and other. It complicates the airway management. So, aerosol box is not routinely recommended. And the HME filters. The filters that is used during ventilator circuits was initially used during the first wave and the second wave. And there is a concern that the HME filters will also increase the resistance. HME filters has to be used. It should be used in the expiratory limb. So if it is used in the expiratory limb, the pressure requirement may be more, it may increase the resistance. So expiratory limb, that increasing airway resistance is not a problem. But that if that is used, a heated wire should be used in the expiratory limb to avoid condensation and water droplet, which may malfunction that HME filter. So filters attached to TPs or bag and mask or HME filters, aerosol box are not routinely recommended. And if at all HME filters has to be used, these precautions should be taken care. So aerosol generating medical procedures, that AGMPS precautions should be routinely undertaken in any NICU which cares for a COVID suspect or a COVID positive neonate. So after admission and giving initial care, now we want to test for the COVID. So when to test, when to repeat the test, that's very important. So the baby born to a COVID positive mother, and if you suspect a perinatal transmission, then between 24 to 48 hours, the first test can be done. Suppose if your unit policy is to discharge the mother yearly on the second day or after 24 hours, it can be taken still earlier, just before discharge, after 24 hours, take a sample and ask the mother to collect the report later. So follow up the neonate to the telephonic conversation. Suppose the first test at 24 to 48 hours is negative, a repeat test is desirable at 5 to 7 days of age. So in the case of exposure to adults or other persons at the postnatal period, then for example, a 10-day-old neonate having contact with the mother becomes positive during the postnatal period, or any other adult in the family becomes positive, or neonate exposed to a healthcare worker who becomes positive. In that case, after 5 to 10 days of contact, like any adult, the neonate can be tested for COVID, and there is no need for repeat testing in that case. If the baby continues to be asymptomatic, do test at 5 to 10 days of after contact. But if the baby is symptomatic and there is a COVID positive mother or is a contact with any other person, the test can be done at the first evaluation itself. You need not wait for that 24 to 48 hours. So the time of first evaluation itself, you can do that first test, and if the test is negative, it can be repeated after 24 to 48 hours to rule out the transmission. Okay, so that is clear. So first test in the case of a baby born to COVID positive mother at 24 to 48 hours, repeated at 5 to 7 days of life if it is the first test is negative. Symptomatic neonates at the time of first evaluation, and another test can be done after 24 to 48 hours of life. Any other test other than that RT-PCR test has to be done or not? So RT-PCR is the recommended test to rule out or rule in COVID-19. If rapid tests are available, it can be done. But if there is a clinical strong suspicion, again we have to do RT-PCR test. That is regarding the type of test to be done. Regarding the other test, If the baby is asymptomatic or having mild COVID-19 only, mild COVID-19 means it does not have any respiratory involvement like tachypnea, grunting, or cyanosis, or any retractions. If there is no respiratory involvement, having mild COVID-19, or the baby is totally asymptomatic, no other routine laboratory test is needed. The baby is symptomatic and having moderate to severe, having a respiratory distress or cough with retractions, having, in that case, relevant biochemical, hematologic, and coagulation test has to be done, and radiologic testing like X-ray test needs to be done. So biochemical, like your basic blood counts, complete blood counts, and other inflammatory markers like CRP, procalcitonin, and other LFT, RFT, and prothrombin time, APTT, D-dimer. So that coagulation test, these all has to be done in the case of a symptomatic and moderate to severe COVID-19 illness. So after investigating, is there any, suppose the baby turns out to be positive, is there any specific treatment? Previously, no specific treatment was recommended for a neonate, and nowadays the only update is after the success proved in adults and other children where steroids has a role in the case of severe illness, we can give steroid to neonates also. So in the case of severe or critical COVID-19 requiring mechanical ventilation, after ruling out sepsis, we can give dexamethasone. So dexamethasone 0.15 mg per kg once daily for 5 to 14 days. In the case of non-availability of dexamethasone, the other alternative drugs like hydrocortisone, methylprednisolone, or prednisolone can be given with the appropriate doses. The other drugs like hydroxychloroquine, chloroquine, ivermectin, or antiviral drugs like remdesivir, lopinavir, or ritonavir are not recommended in neonates. Even the interferons are also not recommended in neonates. We don't have current evidence on the safety profile. So after treatment, when to discharge the baby? If the baby is asymptomatic and stable, roomed in with the mothers, discharge along with the mother. So like any other normal unit where we discharge the baby along with the mother, this baby also can be discharged along with the mother. Suppose if the mother is sick, where rooming in is not possible, and the baby is cared by the attender alone, then the baby can be discharged yearly 24 to 48 hours after taking the swab and can be followed up. The immunization policy, well neonates can be given the routine BCG, FDDB can be given routine irrespective of the COVID status. If the baby is symptomatic and positive, received some treatment, once all the symptoms disappeared and before discharge, the baby can be vaccinated. And for babies who have received steroids or IVIG for a short duration, 5 to 10 days, once the drugs are stopped and before discharge, the baby can be vaccinated. And positive units who have received tocilizumab in the rare event, avoid live virus like OPV and use IPV in that situation, and avoid rotavirus also in that case. So that is the only situation where we change the drugs. Otherwise, the policy is to give vaccine as early as possible. Once the baby's symptoms settle down and plan for discharge, you can vaccinate, or the baby is already well, you can vaccinate by the routine schedule. So that's about the immunization policy, and all the neonates should be followed up for at least 14 days and preferably till 28 days of life, either by a telephone or you can review the baby physically also. And this is for all units born to COVID positive mother. Even if the corona test is negative for the baby needs to be, baby and the mother dyad needs to be in quarantine for at least 14 days, and it needs to be reviewed or followed up for any new symptoms arising or any other complications. So that completes our presentation for the COVID positive, management of a COVID suspect or COVID positive neonates. The newer thing, another one which is now troubling our neonates is the MIS-C. So multisystem inflammatory syndrome in neonates. So nowadays, a lot of multisystem inflammatory syndrome in neonates are reported. So recently, INNF has published some guidelines on how to identify the neonates. It is merely an adaptation from the pediatric guidelines published by the WHO. So the pediatric guideline says fever more than 3 days and rash, shock, something like Kawasaki disease manifestation, fever, and any two of the following like rash, hypotension, or shock, features of myocardial dysfunction in the form of echo findings or elevated troponins or ECG abnormalities, evidence of coagulopathy or acute GE problems. So multi-system involvement and fever and rash usually a multi-system, that is why it's called a multi-system inflammatory syndrome. So evidence for a multi-system involvement is there in a case with the fever and rash. Then we have to work up for inflammatory markers. So the next step is to look for ESR, CRP, or procalcitonin. And we have to rule out the common cause. So even sepsis can cause a fever and all these multi-system involvement. So we have to rule out bacterial sepsis and look for evidence for COVID-19 in the form of RT-PCR or antibodies also. So MIS-C in neonates can occur anything between 14 days after contact with the positive person. So the neonates can present yearly. If the mother is antenatally infected, the neonates can present with MIS-C yearly in the first week of life, or it can occur in the later weeks of life also. Depends on the timing of the contact. But the problem, only modification in neonates, fever is very uncommon neonatal manifestation. So the fever greater than 3 days is not a must. Any fever, even fever and evidence of multi-system involvement, we need to consider MIS-C. So do investigations to rule out bacterial sepsis and look for inflammatory markers. So the initial complete blood count, differential count, electrolytes, RFT, LFT, all, and looking for CRP, ESR. Along with that, send RT-PCR testing and COVID antibody testing. So clinically, suspicion of a multi-system inflammatory syndrome, do the basic workup, tier 1 investigations, along with the COVID workup for antigen as well as for antibody. So the antigen may be RT-PCR may be negative in a neonate, and we can get antibodies, or sometimes we can get both positive. And if there is evidence of, already we know that multi-system involvement by clinical examination and other echo and other findings. If there is evidence of CRP greater than 5 or ESR greater than 40 mm per hour, and at least one of these lymphopenia or thrombocytopenia or neutrophilia, then probably we are dealing with the COVID-19. Go for the second line of investigations, do a cytokine profile, that PTA, PTT, D-dimer, the other markers like ferritin, troponin, and evidence for cardiac markers like troponin, NT-proBNP, echocardiogram as to the second line has to be done. And the treatment for MIS-C is merely an adaptation from the pediatric guideline. So the baby presents with the shock, can use IVIG infusion over 24 to 48 hours, and we can give high dose IV methylprednisolone. If the baby does not present with the shock or life-threatening features, then we can give IVIG and a low-dose methylprednisolone. If IVIG is not available, well, naturally we have to give at least steroids initially. And aspirin can be given if there is no contraindications like bleeding or platelet count less than 80,000. This is merely an adaptation from the pediatric guideline. And steroids has to be can be changed after 3 to 5 days to oral, and then 25% it can be tapered, and the course has to be completed over 3 to 4 weeks. For 1 month we have to give steroids, and echo has to be done at least twice between 1 to 2 weeks and 4 to 6 weeks to assess the LV function and other abnormalities. If there is a persistent fever or ongoing inflammation, repeat IVIG has to be considered. So in the case of shock, we don't know, it can be due to sepsis also. So usually empirical antimicrobials are recommended. The only difference between the pediatric management and the neonatal management of MIS-C is the role of tocilizumab, anakinra, and other biologics are not studied in neonates, and it is not recommended routinely at present. Only if you it has to be decided on an individual case-to-case basis because there is a high risk for immune suppression and high risk for bacterial as well as fungal sepsis reported. So at the time being, it is not recommended in neonates. The options are IVIG, steroids, and aspirin can be given, and heparin needs to be done if there is evidence of thrombosis, coagulopathy, or coronary aneurysm is present. Low molecular weight heparin has to be done. So that completes our presentation from managing a COVID suspect neonate, COVID positive neonate to the recent MIS-C in neonates. So thank you one and all. Thank you for the opportunity and patient listening.